The Volvo XC60 was once the most popular mid-size family SUV in Europe. But now that it's getting on a bit, does it still deserve to be that now? Now, the Volvo XC60 is available in Malaysia in two flavors, being the B5 mild hybrid or this, which is the T8 plug-in hybrid. Now, obviously, this is the model that most people go for. Under the bonnet, you find a 2-litre turbocharged and supercharged 4-cylinder petrol engine mated to a 17-ish kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery, as well as an electric motor over the rear wheels. And somewhere in the middle is an 8-speed automatic gearbox. Combined power outputs are in excess of 400 PS with torque north of 650 Newton meters, which means that this family SUV is a lot faster than it needs to be. Now, the Volvo XC60 has actually been very sympathetically refreshed, and that happened, I think, a couple of years ago, but for some reason we're only getting the car now. Now, as a result, that does mean that you have a slightly different grille up front. This is now done up in black with black slats all the way across, which makes the car look a little bit more mean, which I think looks quite nice. You also get a little bit of black plastic down toward the bottom as part of its sort of aerodynamics, and it actually sweeps up here to give it this sort of weird mustachy look. Now, I'm not entirely sure if that's successful, but more importantly, the vents here do provide some aerodynamic benefit in order to smooth airflow over the front wheels, and so it's not just about looks, there is some function to this too. Now, of course, on either side of that grille, you will find the full LED headlights that have become a signature of all Volvos. This also comes with automatic high beam as well as matrix LED headlights, replete with this Thor's Hammer daytime running light, which also has become a hallmark of modern Volvo design. Now, although the XC60 is getting on a bit, there is no doubt that this car, like the larger XC90 and S90, have aged very, very well. This car still looks as handsome and as pared back and as elegant as it always has. And I love the fact that the various facelifts that have been applied to this car, and that are no doubt are coming for this car later in the future, will retain the majority of this design language, ensuring that these cars last a lot longer than they normally would. Now, that sense of pared back restraint continues down the side of the car. So, for example, there are no unpainted body panels on this car in order to make it look a little bit more urban, which is certainly nice. And because the trim pack that we get in Malaysia for the XC60, all the trim is done up in black, and so we get gloss black window surrounds, gloss black wing mirror caps, as well as gloss black roof rails. Now, that to me is a bit suspicious because these roof rails are functional. So if you were to put a Thula roof box on it, you'd scratch it, wouldn't you? Anyway, moving down the side, again, because we don't have any unpainted body panels, it also means that down here it does look like this car is wearing a skirt, which looks interesting. Now, rolling stock is handled by a set of 19-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Pirelli P0 tires. Now, the alloy wheel designs were updated as part of the facelift, although I will point out that while they are certainly better and more efficient in terms of aerodynamics, it is unfortunate that they're not as pretty as the ones that came with the pre-facelift. Now, I bring that up because as far as I'm concerned, Volvos are usually very pretty, and so I'd like some pretty wheels rather than efficient ones. Thank you very much. Now, at the back, it's much the same story because the facelift was limited to just the rear bumper, where we also get that sort of weird mustachioed look that we saw first in the front. And now, of course, the rear exhaust exits have also been completely deleted as Volvo moves towards a more electrified future. Now, that's certainly a good thing because, as I mentioned, the XC60 is a very good-looking car. So you have these full LED tail lights, which now not only go from the top of the D pillar all the way down here, but they also bleed into the tailgate, which gives this car a unique light signature at night, which differentiates it from the larger XC90 as well as the smaller XC40 and EC40. Now, behind the tailgate, you will find a pretty good amount of space. Despite the fact that this car is naturally a plug-in hybrid with a rear electric motor, in terms of overall load capacity, it is pretty good. Even with the parcel shelf in place, as you can see, there is a good amount of verticality here. On top of that, you can also push that parcel shelf out of the way in order to have better access into the furthest reaches of the boot without having to retract it altogether, which I think is a nice, flexible option. Now, underneath the boot floor, you will find just about enough space for the emergency repair kit as well as the tire inflator, and that's all. Because the charging cables have to live over here. This highlights a packaging difference between the XC60 and the larger XC90 because that car is larger. There is also a larger underfloor storage space for you to hide the cables. The same goes for the Volvo S90, whereas in everything else, they just sort of have to hide it here, or it comes in a bag with like some Velcro on the back in order to sort of stick it onto the side of the boot. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this space is pretty good. You've got a 12-volt socket, you've got some hooks here, you have that parcel shelf I mentioned earlier, plus some lights. And of course, if you want even more space, you can fold the rear seat 60-40, or you can utilize the pass-through in the middle, or the ski hatch, in order to load long, thin items while still retaining 4-seat seating capacity. All of this, I think, looks pretty good for the XC60, and I think it certainly bolsters the fact that this car's primary appeal is as a luxury family SUV. See, the wonderful benefit of plug-in hybrids like this is that I can keep running the air conditioning because it's just using the battery, which is great because the car is currently reporting 46 degrees centigrade outside. So if you wonder why we sometimes shoot in the multi-story, that's why. Now, the interior of the XC60 has seen some changes here and there, but for the most part, it is exactly the same as it was when it first arrived. So up front, you find a vertically oriented Sensus infotainment display, although Sensus is gone. Instead, this now uses Google Automotive OS, something that we've seen in other Volvos recently that we've bemoaned for many reasons, but I'll touch on that a little bit later. And that same operating system is what powers the digital display that lives in front of me. Now, as a result, the digital instrument cluster is now not as visually interesting or as impactful as the Volvo designed instrument cluster used to be. But it shows your map, which is nice. Now, you also have a heads-up display, which is mercifully a Volvo item, and so all of this works quite nicely together. Now, talking about this screen, unlike other car makers where everything has gone into the screen, this car doesn't really do that. So yes, your HVAC controls are in the screen, fine. Your car controls are in the screen, fine. But mercifully, you still have a nice knurled knob here for your volume. You still got your track forward and back buttons, as well as your demister buttons, all living here in some nice tactile feedbacky type buttons, which is always nice to see. Further down, you still get a start-stop knob. You still get an Auraforce crystal gear lever, which is always so nice to see and so nice to hold. And you also get a 12-volt socket here, as well as a wireless charging pad. Now, it is unfortunate, however, that a lot of the controls live in here, because previously, this same knurled material used to be applied to a drive mode roller knob that lived sort of back here, which allowed you to choose your different drive modes. Now, however, you have to go into settings, and then you have to hit driving, and then you have to hit the drive modes. Not so nice. Additionally, there also used to be a button for the around view camera or 360-degree camera. That's also now in the screen. However, because this is a Google Automotive system, you do have a lot of apps. So you have YouTube, you have Google Maps, you also have your Google Assistant and your Play Store to install other apps should you want it. However, I am delighted to report that finally, as part of an update rolling across all Volvo models, in addition to Apple CarPlay, you now get Android Auto, which means that you are not reliant on this car and its 3G or whatever SIM card in order to run the apps and use your various functionalities, which means that after the 5 years is up, after you buy your brand new Volvo and you might have to subscribe to this, you don't have to. You can tell them to keep their subscription because you have a phone. However, as you've no doubt have noticed, there is one drawback. Apparently, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto in this car is only available via a wired connection, which is good because I like to charge my phone, but it's not so good because I know a lot of people who'd rather use the wireless charging pad. Additionally, this wireless charging pad is just a rubber mat, great at holding the phone, really bad at heat dissipation. So every time I put my phone here, it just overheats. Not great. Now, beyond that, the practical aspects in this car are very well catered for. You've got a decently sized glove box here, which is lined in fabric, which means that nothing rattles about. You also get a decently sized center console bin, also lined in felt and rubber, so things don't rattle about. You get a couple of cup holders here, replete with a nice sort of roller shutter to cover it, as well as a 12-volt socket up here, like I mentioned earlier. USB-C ports live in here, and overall practicality is pretty good. Decently sized door bins, big enough for a 1.5-litre size bottle, as well as some additional flotsam behind it. And of course, material quality in this car is absolutely excellent. You get a stitched leather dash up here, you get more stitching on the dash front, more soft touch materials here. You get this lovely real metal trim on the dash, which looks fantastic, and it even comes with an integrated Swedish flag underneath the passenger air conditioning vent, which also acts as an expansion joint should the interior heat or cool through the weather. These seats are also absolutely fantastic. Volvo makes some of the best seats in the market, and it continues into this XC60. Not only in terms of overall comfort is this good, but your lateral support is really good as well. You have electric under thigh support, as well as electric lumbar, as well as side support, which means that you can get nice and cozy and snug in this car. The steering wheel is also adjustable for reach and rake, which means that again, it's so easy to find a comfortable driving position and to be able to enjoy the driving experience in this car, which is further supplemented by the absolutely brilliant Bowers & Wilkins audio system. Now, the back half of the cabin benefits from a couple of things. Firstly, you have a full panoramic sunroof, replete with an openable sunroof portion in the front, which means that this interior can be bathed in light, even though it's done up in this rather dour black leather. And of course, there is the fact that you get pillar mounted air conditioning vents. There's nothing in the middle, no crotch coolers, just vents on the side, which means that as I'm sat here, this air conditioner vent is blowing directly to my face, which means I am very, very comfortable in the back. Now, with the front seat set up in my driving position, about 170 centimeters, you can see I have a good amount of knee room, and despite that panoramic sunroof, I still have a pretty good amount of headroom, which means that a 6-footer, for example, shouldn't have any issues in this car at all. On top of that, because Volvo is intelligent, the front seats are mounted quite high, which means there's always space for you to put your feet. And because this car has concert seating, where the hip point of the front seats are actually set lower from the rear, I have an excellent view out, not just through the front, but also through the sides, which means that even though this car has a relatively high hip point or hip shoulder line on this car, you still have a pretty good view out. Now, in terms of rear amenities, I've got these nets on the back of the seats, which are something I'm always suspicious about in terms of overall longevity, because eventually these might sag and look a little bit tired. And of course, I have a couple of USB-C ports hiding behind this little cover here. However, I don't have rear air conditioning controls, and like I mentioned earlier, I only have air conditioning vents on the B pillars themselves. However, I do have decently sized door bins, big enough for a litre-sized bottles, and I have small pockets up here, and I have a deployable armrest, which is also lined in leather and lovely and stitched. You also get a couple of deployable cup holders from here, which have a nice, sort of very solid, satisfying action to them, which is certainly nice to see. Amenities for children are actually even more generous, because even though we don't get rear sun blinds, which would have been nice, we do get very easily locatable ISOFIX mounts, which means that mounting a rear child seat in here shouldn't be a problem at all. And of course, if you have older children, for example, this car actually comes with a built-in booster seat, which means if I just pop this, it will actually raise the seat a little bit, and so children that are about 95 centimeters tall, between 15 and 36 kilograms, can now sit on this without having to get a separate car seat, which means that as a parent, you only have to invest in the infant child seat. So that certainly takes away some cost. And of course, because it's convertible, you just press the button and then you push it back in place, and now an adult can sit there. Now, there are a few things in this car that I would like to point out. Firstly, material quality in the back is certainly very nice. Materials used, like this fabric here, is all very well and good. It feels nice and posh and plush. However, because there are no rear sun blinds, you will need to tint this car quite considerably, particularly if you have infants, because UV rays can be very damaging for little baby children. On top of that, if you are taller, or if you are from a family where you're generally more vertically blessed, then you may note that interior space can become a bit of a premium. If you have a tall passenger in the front and a tall passenger in the rear, it does get a little bit tight. Lastly, it's to do with the doors. So while there is a lot of space in here, the doors themselves don't open very wide, which means that fitting a large child seat may be a bit of a fuss and a struggle to get actually through the door openings themselves, even though there is plenty of space once they are in here. However, for the most part, the XC60 is very well and intelligently designed for family use, which means that a lot of these are very minor niggles. It's just things that I'd like to highlight to you in case you are shopping in this segment and it is something that you're considering. However, I think the party piece of the XC60 has very little to do with this cabin, or at least it plays a part in it, because the experience of the XC60 shines brightest when you're driving. Now, the reason why I say the experience of any Volvo is actually from the driver's seat is because the driving experience in a car like this is truly something else. So firstly, just to recap, we have a plug-in hybrid system with a 2-litre 4-cylinder up front, an electric motor at the rear, and a 17-ish kilowatt-hour battery sandwiched right here in the middle. Now, this results in a very different driving experience from lots of other cars. For starters, this car can do up to about 80-ish kilometers, I think, on a full charge, where you can AC charge the car up to 6.67 kilowatts or something to that effect, which means that a dead to full charge takes about 3 hours, although on a 3-pin socket, it will take about 10 hours, which I think overall is still a pretty functional, usable kind of charging rate. And so that means that your primary drive in this car is delivered by the electric motor. And so when you set off, let's say when you leave home or you leave work, chances are you'll be running on electric, and so the engine doesn't really power on, which means that as you're driving about like I am now, it is incredibly quiet, incredibly serene. There is no noise, so to speak, just a little hum from the tires and a little bit of a buzz from the wind as you go by, but even that is very, very well suppressed, and so it's not really that big of a deal. It's only when you start to gain speed, for example, if you're cruising on the motorway, etc., if the battery is low, then the engine will kick on. And when it does, it feeds that power to the front wheels via that 8-speed automatic gearbox, which means that progress is still very smooth and very unflustered. Now, this plug-in hybrid system works in various ways. So for example, when you're just driving about like this, you can run it in all electric. Alternatively, if you put your foot down, you try to drive the car a bit more intently, the engine and motor work together in order to provide maximum performance. In doing so, it also means that the car sort of figures out how to optimize the powertrain. And so, for example, at bits where there might be turbo lag from the 2-liter 4-cylinder up front, the electric motor will feed in power in order to maintain a very smooth and very linear torque curve. This means that, again, the Volvo XC60 plug-in hybrid, like we're driving now, as well as any other plug-in hybrid from Volvo, just feels truly relentless when you put your foot down. Certainly more brawny and more hairy-chested than you'd expect from something packing a 2-liter 4-cylinder, like a CR-V. Now, as you're driving along, like I said, this car is very serene and very comfortable, and that sense of serenity actually extends all the way up to motorway speeds. When you're doing 120, 130 kilometers an hour, the amount of road noise in this car is very, very well minimized. Wind noise is also very, very well minimized, which means that, again, as you drive about, it just feels so calm. The XC60 is a car that I would happily do long distances in all day long. This seat is comfortable, the ADAS functions are great, it's just a great place to be. Now, talking about the ADAS functionality, the majority of XC60 buyers spend most of their time in town. This is the car that shuttles them to work and back, that sends the kids to school, does errands around town, etc. And so this car's primary sort of habitat is urban driving. And when you're driving in town, that's when you really appreciate the active safety features that this car offers. So, for example, this car offers the Pilot Assist suite of active safety features, all under the IntelliSafe umbrella by Volvo. So what that means is you have cameras all around the car, as well as sensors all around the car that work together to ensure that you remain on the straight and narrow. So you get full level 2 semi-autonomy systems, including things like adaptive cruise control with traffic jam assist. You get lane centering, blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, rear AEB with brake intervention, etc. All the things that you come to expect not only of a family car, but also what you come to expect of a Volvo. And the XC60 certainly doesn't disappoint in that regard. But of course, because Volvo has been doing this a lot longer than a lot of other people, it means that there is a degree of polish to these systems that means that you can reliably use them on a day-to-day basis. It is such an easy car to live with in that regard that it makes this a very difficult car for me to criticize. However, there are some criticisms, and so I'll touch on that now. Firstly, this being a Volvo, naturally the priority here is comfort, and so the primary ride in this car is very soft, but the secondary ride in this car is also surprisingly soft, which means that when you do carry speed into a corner, you will realize that this car likes to lean quite a bit. Now, even though the center of gravity of this car is impressively low, and so that lean itself is very well minimized, the lean is still there. You can't really escape it. And so this is certainly not a car meant to be driven dynamically. Even though the steering wheel in this car is very, very accurate, it's just not that kind of car. And so I implore you not to drive this car that way. Secondly, there is the fact that we've also been hearing a lot of talk recently about plug-in hybrid vehicles, particularly from Chinese automakers, as well as what we've seen from Honda's PHEV system, where the engine works primarily as a generator in order to feed power into the battery, and so your primary drive, or 90% of your drive, is provided via electric mobility. Now, compared to those systems, I am of the mind that the plug-in hybrid system, not only in this XC60, but also other luxury car makers like Mercedes-Benz and BMW, are starting to feel a little bit aged. Because when there is that transition between electric and combustion motivation, you can feel it. You will also be able to hear the engine because it is of a considerable size, and there's only so much that one can do to isolate it from the cabin. As a result, it just means that it feels like this system is not quite as polished as what we've seen from some of the very best that have come out of China. On top of that, given that this car will do about 600 kilometers on a full tank of fuel, plus another 80 kilometers on a full charge of battery, it also doesn't seem to offer the same kind of range that we've seen, again from Chinese plug-in hybrid or hybrid electric systems. Now, is that a bad thing? Maybe, maybe not. On the one hand, I like the range and I like the fact that I get to drive on electric power most of the time. It means it's very smooth, it's very linear, and it also means that when I put my foot down, it always goes like a stabbed rat, rather than this, where when you drive it as an electric vehicle, the rear electric motor is just not punchy enough to provide the sort of immediate reaction that you'd want, particularly as you, for example, merge into traffic or do an overtake maneuver. This is very different, of course, from other car makers like, again, JACU and Haval, etc., who put large electric motors in their cars in order to provide the performance primarily from electric motivation. So again, there are pros and cons here, yes. But at the moment, in terms of luxury vehicles, the PHEV system that you get from Volvo is perhaps one of the very best. The transition from combustion to electric is amongst the smoothest, although it is not incredibly smooth, it's just smooth. BMW and Mercedes don't do this nearly well enough, and Audi doesn't even bother at all. Which means that, again, it is impressive, but not as impressive as it could be. Now, it is worth bearing in mind that this sort of hybrid system that I've been talking about is available from the Geely group, which means that it does stand to reason that at some point, Volvo car may look into those hybrid systems in order to fit them into their cars, particularly more compact models like the XC60, the XC40, EC40, etc., the smaller cars. But of course, that is a matter of the future. That's not talking about right now. For right now, I think the XC60 is still perhaps one of the very best plug-in hybrid mid-size luxury SUVs currently available. It is an incredibly polished package. This powertrain is excellent. It provides the performance you want with the fuel economy that you've come to expect. Because even as we've driven this car about 400 kilometers, it has only consumed, on average, 1.9 liters to the 100. And that is bearing in mind that I cannot charge my car at home. I've only been able to charge this car full once or twice, which means that I'm hardly driving this in the most economical fashion. As far as I'm concerned, the XC60 is a very, very difficult product to beat. However, if you're looking for a luxury mid-size family SUV like this that has a little bit more dynamic chops, then you might be better served by the BMW X3. Because while you can only at the moment get that with an internal combustion engine, that car does drive impressively well, which means that from behind the wheel, if you're a keen driver, you will feel a little bit better amused by the BMW. And while Mercedes-Benz does offer a GLC plug-in hybrid with a pretty decent range, I might add, that car doesn't seem to offer the same kind of quality or refinement that the XC60 has. And so if you want something with inferior build quality and a noisier cabin and is also more expensive, then there's also the Mercedes-Benz GLC, I suppose. But overall, as I said, the XC60 is a very, very difficult package to beat. In the luxury segment, I think this car is basically unmatched. And even if you move further up, this powertrain is just so solid and so well sorted that it just makes sense. And so once again, I am back in a Volvo and waxing lyrical because good God, this car is good. In any case, that concludes our review of the 2025 Volvo XC60 T8 plug-in hybrid. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can join our new WhatsApp channel because all the links to those are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh. And please don't cut me off in traffic because I'm enjoying my Bowers & Wilkins audio system.